Hi, everyone. My name is Meghan, and I'm one of the High Rock pastors, and I'm glad that I get to be with you today as we continue our journey towards Christmas together. What lets you know that Christmas is coming? Maybe it's decorations or the parties, the return of the Queen of Christmas, Miss Mariah Carey herself, or maybe the ads everywhere. We had traditions that helped signal that Christmas was coming in my family. Every year, we'd go downtown to my dad's office building in the Chicago Loop and start the day by looking at the windows at Marshall Fields. And then we'd stop inside to see the largest indoor Christmas tree in the world. We'd cross the street to go to the Christkindl Mart for lunch, and in the shadow of the Picasso, we'd eat brats and drink hot chocolate. My parents would have some mulled wine. And my dad would buy my mom these little German birds that she could put on her Christmas tree. There was a new one every year. The lights and the smells and the music would just be beautiful, and it would fill me with so much excitement. It felt like the whole city was there, anticipating that Christmas was coming. That was so beautiful to me. Maybe your favorite Christmas memories are like mine, or maybe you prefer Christmas in a warmer location where you trade your pine trees for palm trees. Or instead of being in a city, you relish quiet in the country with only the sound of the snow falling off trees around you. For many folks, these are beautiful Christmas experiences. And listen, they might not be my preference, but I'm not here to yuck someone else's yum. Just because I think that Christmas in a big city with big noises and lights is beautiful doesn't mean that your Christmas over the river and through the woods to your grandmother's house isn't also beautiful. This doesn't need to be a competition. Because at its core, beauty has to resonate with each of us. Beauty, in my experience, doesn't start in our minds, but ignites something in our souls that's hard to explain. It connects us to something bigger than ourselves and inspires us to live toward a more beautiful world. And we're all so different, and so it's not surprising that each one of us can resonate with different things that can make Christmas beautiful. In this sermon series, we've been exploring 4 major questions that people use as a filter for ascertaining whether an ideology can have validity in their lives. For some people, we've talked about how they need something to be real or true. Next week, we'll explore the need for something to be good. Today, though, we'll be asking whether Christmas is truly beautiful. So much about Christmas is superficial distraction, right? The tinsel, shopping, noshing, the nostalgia. Is there anything deeper about beauty that can engage our souls? Or are superficialities that are just shiny and distracting the best that we can do? Yes, beauty has often been reduced down to aesthetic appeal, but really it can be much deeper. For instance, consider the Black is Beautiful movement of the 1960s and 70s, in which Black folks in the U.S. triumphantly celebrated their own beauty in a culture that told them they had to look like white folks in order to be considered beautiful. Light skin, straight hair, a pointy nose. That isolated beauty to a certain segment of the population. But this movement said, no, you can also be beautiful if you have naturally curly hair and dark skin and a wide nose. While on the surface, this was addressing physical beauty, Black is Beautiful was a part of the broader civil rights movement in the United States. At its core, the folks who led this movement were trying to help address something going on underneath the physical aspect of beauty. They wanted Black folks to love themselves just as they were, instead of needing someone else to tell you that you were worthy of love. They wanted other folks who weren't Black to also affirm their worth and dignity, to be able to say, we need you and we love you for who you are in all of your unique makeup. These people were dreaming of a more beautiful world, one where folks of all kinds would be treated with equal dignity and care in their country, where everyone would be seen as beautiful. It wasn't taking away from the rights of or the beauty from white folks, as if one group of people has rights and is considered beautiful and it must come at the expense of someone else. But friends, that's a lie that it had to be either or. Civil rights leaders were advocating for a beautiful world that could be if everyone had the same rights. Instead of either or, they were saying it could be a both and. Freedom wouldn't be at anyone's expense, but would come because folks were as committed to their neighbor as they were to themselves. It was asking folks to recognize their need for connection to each other in order to create real beauty. This is beauty that goes much deeper than just skin tone. It goes to the essence of who we are as humans, and that's what makes us truly beautiful. So with that in mind, is Christmas truly beautiful? not cute or schmaltzy or whatever. I'm asking us to consider if what happens at Christmas is going to lead to deeper connection. Because once we recognize this deeper connection, it changes the way that we feel about ourselves, God, and others. It has the possibility to change the world. So is Christmas beautiful? I think most years, those big, spectacular displays and sounds were beautiful for me because the crowds and the noise helped me feel connected to something bigger than me. Those big expressions matched my big God and my understanding of how powerful God was. That connectivity with God helped me dream and act with God towards a more beautiful world. But this year, y'all, if I'm honest, everything just feels different this year. All of those huge expressions of glory and triumph feel particularly out of reach and really insufficient. As many of you know, I had my knee replaced in the middle of October. Yes, I know, I'm too young for this surgery, and I know that your grandma or your mother or your mailman had this surgery, and they're better than ever. I know it's important to do my exercises and get my sleep and not get too dependent on those pain pills. Y'all, I know. I've had a bunch of surgeries like this one. And so I knew what to expect, and physically, I am feeling much better than I did before, thanks be to God. What I didn't know to expect was how emotionally depleted I would feel on the other side of this surgery and how isolating it would be. While I'm gaining strength and mobility all the time, I still don't have a ton of energy. Going into public is daunting, and frankly, even just going to the movies gets uncomfortable for longer than an hour. And we've had so much support from High Rockers, my family, and friends, but part of my recovery is just really lonely. There's not really much that people can do in that space with me. And so a big God with big dreams that require a lot from me, I don't have energy for that God. I don't really have energy for that Christmas. So can Christmas still be beautiful? Maybe you can resonate with me. And maybe for you, it's not that you've undergone a medical procedure, but perhaps you're depleted for other reasons. Perhaps you've run really hard this year, feel like you're crashing into Christmas. Maybe finances are tight and you can't get the sort of presents or go to the same special events that have previously made Christmas beautiful for you. Maybe there are family relationships that are so broken that your table and home will be missing a few folks around it, and their absence will suck all of the joy from the room. Friends, even if it feels like it right now, you aren't alone. Because even in this bleak midwinter, I still think that our text today invites us to consider that Christmas is beautiful. For those of us that can feel Christmas magic right now, and those of us that can't. John's gospel opens with a song. It's a hymn that tries to impress on us all about the encompassing nature of who Jesus is. Now, every gospel was written so that we might know something of Jesus, but John is explicit. This was written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. And at first glance, the images that John gives us are big, spectacular ones. Christ, who was and is present in the cosmos at the beginning of time. Christ, who created all things and is in all things. Christ, the light that breaks the darkness and has overcome darkness for all of time. I imagine that this Christ's theme song is loud and powerful. Kind of like you can't tell me that when the immigrant song comes on in Thor Ragnarok that you don't get chills, right? or that the opening chords of Eye of the Tiger from Rocky 3, like you know that these heroes are about business. You want them to win. And this version of God, the one who is larger than life, has been the God that normally is beautiful for me at Christmas. That God reminds me that in the middle of winter and cold, that they've always been at work in the world, Father, Son, Spirit, working to restore all of the brokenness in this world. I want to be connected to this big, huge God and to this incredibly powerful work. But when I don't have the energy for that, or when that God feels so far off and removed from the mundane aspects of my life, that's not so beautiful. In fact, that actually feels like an impossible standard of beauty that I'll never be able to access. It's isolating, not connecting. And so is that what our text leaves us with? That in order for Christmas to be beautiful, we must connect with this big God? Friends, I really don't think so. Because just like there are loud, powerful theme songs, There are other songs that are different, but also beautiful. The former connects us to God and each other with force and power. But I think about the lullaby that a parent sings to their child in the middle of the night. They whisper words of love and care, praying blessing over their children. Or the song of lament that cries out in grief over loss in the world. These songs mourn and wail and speak words of hope for justice. They're different than the triumphant tunes of the hero's song, but they remind us that God is present in the blessing and in the righteous anger too. They remind us that we aren't alone in our experience in the world, even in those moments that have the potential to be the most isolating. They're also beautiful. And John's hymn might start with Christ who is present in a big way, but it doesn't stop there. The text goes on to say that Christ, the God of the cosmos, put on flesh and made his dwelling among us. This God, who might feel far off and inaccessible, heard the cries of the world that was isolated and broken and chose to come and set up shop in the neighborhood. In my current depleted state, that feels beautiful. Remembering at Christmas that God would care to connect with me and you and all of creation so much that God would choose to come to us. Instead of asking us to power up to get on God's level, God meets us where we are. I can get on board with that Christmas. That is beautiful. What if it doesn't have to be an either or? What if Christmas is beautiful because Christ is both and? Because no matter which version of the song you play, the loud, powerful one or the quiet, unassuming one, this song that John writes about Christ is a song of God connecting in love with the world. When we read this text, did you hear echoes from other parts of Scripture? Perhaps from Genesis 1? The beginning of God's story in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Christ was there, creating the earth. Now that could be massive. Creating the earth, cymbals crash, trumpets sound. But when we play it to a different tune, we hear that Christ cares enough about the earth to be in its creation. Not a snap, poof, magically it appears. Nothing that spectacular, but no, in the care, the detail, the down on his knees, getting in the mudness of the forming of the earth and all that is in it. Christ was there creating the earth. Christ who was both big enough to create humanity and small enough to come and put on flesh and make his dwelling among us, to connect with us. They're both beautiful acts of creation towards connection where there once was isolation. They're both about bringing life where there was once nothing. One's just slower and quieter. It reminds us that both the cosmic stuff of heaven and the menial stuff of earth is the stuff of Christ. See, if Christmas has to be powerful and huge in order to be beautiful, well, it's really hard to find the beauty in that every year. Many of us chase the magic that we experienced growing up when our worlds were smaller and less confusing. But when we're confronted with the reality of the world, when we're faced with sickness and death and pain and isolation, when that doesn't stop on Christmas and there isn't a magic solution or someone magically coming to save us, it can be really hard to see the beauty in Christmas. But what if Christmas didn't have to be huge or magical in order to be beautiful every time? What if the beauty of Christmas is that it's this connection story that's big enough to include the small, beautiful things too? Perhaps we can discern beauty by how it reflects the beauty of our Creator, beauty that connects out of love. John's gospel goes on to point out all of the ways that Christ connects in love in big and small ways throughout his ministry on earth. He meets with a woman at a well. He talks with her and asks her for a drink. That's a small act, one that could be glossed over, except that talking with her was a big deal. And this was an act of creating connection and inclusion. And it inspired a whole new way of life, not just for this woman, but for her whole community. It was beautiful. Jesus goes on to heal a man who could not walk and was isolated from his community. If we were to encounter this today, it would be miraculous, almost magical. And certainly it is, but it's not beautiful because it removed this man's disability. No, Jesus removed the barrier that caused him to be isolated. And so now this once paralyzed man has experienced love and connection with Jesus and can experience life and connection in a community now too. This is beautiful. Perhaps if we want to be postured to be inspired by the beauty in the big and small things of Christmas and of Christ, we need to start by noticing the places where connection is already happening and lean in there. Jesus made his dwelling among us and created new connections that were beautiful. If we're people of Christ, what would it look like to make our dwelling among the people that God loves and create beautiful connections too? Our Christmas seasons may be spectacular, but they still might not be creating connection. Instead of crashing into Christmas, I'd invite you to take time to slow down and savor the beauty of this season. Some of us will gravitate towards this beauty naturally, and others of us will need to intentionally stop and listen for the beautiful invitation from Christ, or we'll miss it. Slowing down will lead to noticing connection with God and others in ways that allow us to participate in dwelling in a more beautiful world. So take this time this week to take a break every day to connect with God. If you're helping raise a kid, this is a great way to also invite them into taking a break this time. Perhaps it's engaging in an Advent devotional together, or spending time reminding them that they're loved by God and you, and encouraging them to express love towards others. This is connecting like Christ. It's dwelling in a beautiful world. One way that I connect with Christ to be reminded that I'm loved and to love others is in journaling. This year I decided to add intentional gratitude to this practice. I realized sometime last year that it was becoming too easy for me to feel cynical about much of life, even as I could also objectively point to how incredible my life is. I was still feeling isolated instead of participating in creating beautiful connections. And so I spend 5 minutes with my journal, just writing down the things and people that I'm grateful for that day. And if it's necessary, I'll expound on that. It reminds me of just how interconnected my life is, that it's because of God and others that my life is beautiful. I had been doing about 6 weeks of this habit before my surgery, and I can honestly say that that's been the tether that has held me to God and to be able to combat the lie that I'm alone in this period of life that has felt less than beautiful. Typically, I would be grateful for sunny days where everything seems more alive and cheerful, but when my life has been turned upside down, when my sleep is just not regulated, the sun can feel too bright and I want to escape from it. Instead, I find myself grateful for the bright moon that glows through my skylights at night. Instead of this loud trumpet sound, I need a quiet piano melody. Both are good and beautiful. Both remind me of God's close dwelling with me and massive power, but one is more life-giving in this season. I don't have to pretend in the glow of the moon that everything is okay, but I can lay there and gaze on it, thankful for its light in the darkest, quietest part of the night. Instead of feeling alone, I feel loved and connected in that moment. It's beautiful. I've also been aware that my recovery has forced me to slow down in some ways. Because I've been going slower, I notice that things that I would just glaze over now command more of my attention. It's easy to notice the big and flashy places of beauty in our lives, but to notice the small places of beauty in those mundane spots, the places that we might be invited to dwell in, if we haven't slowed down, it might mean that we can't see that beauty. So if you aren't seeing the beauty around you, you might consider slowing down to create margin in your life. Because I'm slowing down, I have to be intentional about how I use my time and my energy. I think that it's easy at Christmas to think about how to make it special for the people that we're close to, right? The ones that we care about, the ones that are easy to love. I feel that. I love creating spaces of connection for and dwelling among my kids and my friends and my family. But too often when I settle for making it special for a few folks, I miss where Jesus is asking me to partner in dwelling among different people, creating new connections for everybody. It's the difference between having an either-or mentality and a both-and posture, right? We can love and value the connections that we have with our friends and our family and allow those beautiful connections to expand into things where more people will feel valued and included, just as they are, where more people are told that they are necessary to your life because we all belong to each other. Consider how your household might choose to create a beautiful life or connection where there is none. Maybe that's choosing simplicity for yourselves so you might make space for someone who might be alone. Sometimes we're overwhelmed with how big our preparations for festivities are. We forget to notice who might not have a festivity to attend. Consider how you might need to make space to notice who Christ is inviting you to connect with. Jesus chose to put on flesh in order to connect with people in new ways. As we choose humble but expansive, loving times of connection, we do so with our God. Perhaps for you, it's choosing a new way to use the money you have, not just to give life to your household, but to create connection with others too. A few years ago, I stopped buying presents for my friends, and I instead used that money and time to bake sweetbreads and prepare a whole bunch of Swedish glögg for a whole bunch of people. My money goes farther, but as I prepare these treats, I pray over the folks that will receive them, giving thanks for who they are in my life. And then I write some of those appreciations on a card and I give it to them. It's a small act, but the years of putting time into these small acts is starting to bear fruit in places where I've needed to rely more heavily on a friend. Instead of just sharing pastries together, it's been a way to now share real life. One friend in particular started as a gym acquaintance a few years ago, and I felt like he was someone that I wanted to connect with more. He was sort of skeptical of me because I'm a pastor, and understandably so because of the way that he's been hurt by the church in his past. So I baked for him, and I just wrote a note letting him know I appreciated him. And then again the next year and the year after that. I didn't have an ulterior motive. It was just an act of care and connection. But over the years, we've started to have deeper conversations, and we've supported and challenged each other to grow. And a few weeks ago when I was at the gym doing my rehab, I was just like in a really low place. I felt so isolated and I just started to cry. And no, I don't have a beautiful cry. I am 100% an ugly crier. So this friend noticed and he sent me a note later on in the day encouraging me in my rehab, which I appreciated. But it was actually the thing that came next that helped me feel so much more connected and valued. He took time to share about how our relationship was inviting him to be more compassionate and to create more connections in his own life. His view of who was deserving of love and being valued was expanding because of the ways he saw my husband and I deal with different people in our lives. Our connection that started over something small was inviting him to make more connections too. It did not make my rehab any easier, right? But I did feel less alone. And I was reminded that I'm definitely not alone in helping create a more beautiful world. For me, that's been a journey of noticing Christ's invitation and trying to live from a place of response to that invitation. And I got to see the work of Christ in my friend, even if he doesn't know that. I think that's so beautiful. None of what I've named, practicing gratitude, inviting people into your home, journaling, offering appreciation, none of that is big and flashy. Because y'all, right now, I cannot do big and flashy. But I have seen life come out of these little acts of love. I've seen connection and inclusion grow where there used to be walls and fear. Because the more connection that we have with each other, the more we start to see how God is at work in and through the people around us. The more that we have an opportunity to be a witness to Christ dwelling among us. And like John the Baptist, the more we'll be able to testify to the beauty of that connection. Of course, there are ways, if God is inviting you to do it, that you can bless others in absurdly remarkable ways, in some of these big ways, right? I know one high rocker who just bought a complete stranger a car because they found out that there was a need. That helped bring life to that person. It brought connection and inclusion where there used to be fear and isolation. Those big things are beautiful too. And so I think when I get back to this question, is Christmas beautiful? Instead of focusing on what I need to happen at Christmas in order for it to be beautiful, I love that John invites us to consider the one who we remember at Christmas. In Christ was life, and that light was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. If you feel like you're missing the beauty in Christmas this year, consider that Christ might be inviting you to examine the communities and the connections that you're investing in. Christ, the one who brought connection and included all, that values all, invites us to do that in our lives too. So whether you wait for Christmas this year in ways that are big and bright like a sunny day, or still and silent like the moonlit night, know that they're both beautiful. Both make ways for people to come to know the light of the world. May we be known as people who are known for creating a more beautiful life too, with more inclusion and connection. Thanks be to God.